Okay, this is IELTS speaking part 2. This is going to be our practice one. This will actually be the sixth lesson. It's the fifth part 2 and the sixth lesson overall. So, hello. This is Jason, or you could call me Gawain. Remember to practice, practice, practice. After we go over this, practice it. This is probably the most important thing to practice, as most students have problems with part 2 rather than part 1 and part 3, which we'll be getting into shortly. And we're not going to review today because most of everything we talked about is for part 2, and we're going over all those part 2 things today. Okay, so we actually have a part 2 question today that we're going to be looking at. Not just hometown stuff that we've been using as examples so far. Right, so the question we're looking at today is describe a plan in your life that is not related to work or study. You should say what it is about, why you made it, what you need to do first, and explain how you would feel if it is successful. Okay, so when they give you the question, you're going to have 1 minute to prepare. I know we've talked about that a little before. Only 1 minute. So the first thing we're going to do is take down some notes. Of course, today we'll be spending a lot longer on it because we're going through it slowly. But keep in mind, you're only going to have 1 minute. So what are your interrogatives? And what are your senses? Okay, you have to remember your interrogatives. Who, what, where, why, when, how. Be able to say them very quickly, right? Who, what, where, why, when, how. They're done. You're ready to write about them. Have them ready to go. Also, your senses. Sight, hearing, taste, smell, and tactile. Have these ready to go, right? Remember that. You only have 1 minute to take notes, so you need to do it as quickly as possible. Have these things memorized. So the first thing that you need to decide is how you want to answer the question, what your answer is going to be. Sometimes this might take a few seconds to think about. Other times you might have 3 or 4 good answers. You need to decide which one is the best, which one that you could talk about the most. So let's say these are the things that pop into your mind, right? There are a number of things here, right? Something that doesn't have to do, a plan you have that doesn't have to do with work or study can be marriage. You might plan on getting married or having children. And of course, you could put those both together. You could say, I want to get married and have children, and give you more to talk about. Another thing might be an activity you would like to learn, right? Or maybe a hobby or something you want to do, but you haven't done yet, or maybe you want to do it more. I decided for this example, we're going to talk about a place you want to visit. Actually, more than one place you want to visit. We're going to sort of talk about traveling. But you got to come up with something quick so that you could take notes for it. This might take 5 or 10 seconds, just deciding what you want to talk about, making sure you have enough to talk for 2 minutes. Now, on the piece of paper they'll give you, if it's in person or what you'll see on the computer, they'll already have some things for you. They'll have some interrogative questions for you. You don't have to touch on all these if you don't want to, if you think of better things to say. But you might as well, because they're there for you, right? So you should say what it is about, why you made it, what you need to do first, and explain how you would feel if it's successful. Right? So they've already done some of our interrogatives for us. We've got a what, a why, another what, and a how. As I said, you don't have to answer these. You could think if you think of something better, but it doesn't hurt. They're there for you. What you might want to do is think of some other stuff to say, but have this in front of you so that you could see it and you know you want to touch on these things if you need more time. But again, you don't have to do those if you think of other better things, right? So, what it is about. This can basically mean what it is. This could be our big what for our interrogatives. We could pick a particular place to travel, or we can just say we want to travel around the world. Traveling around the world can give us more to talk about. Today, we're going to pick kind of three places. Again, I know this doesn't relate to you. While we're going through this, you might want to think of a different way you could answer it and take down notes and just watch how we're answering this one. Then we have why you made it, meaning why you made this plan. We could say, it seems fun. I like to travel and experience new cultures. Then they have what you need to do first. So you could say, maybe I need to graduate from university. I need to save up money, right? These are legitimate things you might need to do first before you go traveling. How you would feel if it was successful. Well, you'd probably feel great, right? Or you say, I feel good. That's not a great question. I think it's a very quick answer. If you think of it, put it in there. Like I said earlier, today we're going to pick 3 countries. You also might want to pick several countries that are most important to you. And you can say for this, I would say that it's a lifelong goal, a lifelong thing. So the 3 countries I picked, let's say that you want to go to Thailand, Germany, and Canada. Those are the most important to you. Of course, I picked those completely at random. You could pick random things if you like. Remember, it's better to tell the truth, but you could add more, give more information. Pretend you really only want to go to Germany. You could just say you still want to go to Thailand and Canada, right? Just to give you more to talk about. Now, let's go through the rest of the interrogatives. So think about your interrogatives. We're going to answer who, what, where, why, when, how. Some of these we've already answered. They were part of the questions that we were asked, right? You might want to maybe pause this, take a few seconds, and write some more stuff down. See what you come up with. Okay, so we have who. My friend Joe and my parents, right? What was going through my head? Maybe my friend Joe. I'm just making this up for today. You might have a better idea if you're using your own personal life. But I just made this up. My friend Joe, let's say he gave me the idea when I was younger. And my parents, let's say they're going to help me with this somehow. So those are some who's I'm going to talk about. What is already done, but you could always think of more. I just thought today we don't need more. Where already done. For this question, I don't know that we could think of more wheres. I mean, I threw in a few. Why? We've already done that. The reason you want to go. When? After I graduate, and then after that, maybe once a year, right? Maybe you want to travel a lot, go to different places. How? We've done one how. I threw another in here. How by plane, and also how is after working for a while and saving some money, right? Okay, now let's think of our senses. What can we say about these? Sight, hearing, taste, smell, tactile. This is a little harder for this one. We could still use, I could think of a lot of sight, maybe taste, but this is something future plans, right? So we talk about the future, so it's hard to remember some hearing or tactile sensations for this particular question. But we could still knock out a couple of these. Why don't you maybe pause, take a few minutes to think of what you could answer this way, right? Okay, so we're not going to do all of these. This particular question, doesn't lend itself well to answering all of these because it's future. It's hard to talk. You can, right? You can use a lot of your senses talking about the future, but it's easier to do that if you're talking about the past or present. So we're not going to do all of these. We don't need to. We have enough strategies where we could do other things. So, sight, right? Let's say Thailand, it's an interesting culture. Temples, right? You want to see some Buddhist temples, and they have some beautiful beaches. Sight for Germany, maybe some Renaissance castles. Germany has a lot of those. I lived in Germany for a few years. They have a number of castles. And actually, the Walt Disney Castle is based on a real castle in Germany. And the Black Forest, that's a famous forest in Germany. Canada, let's say we want to go to Canada because it's a big country with few people in it if we compare it to China, the US, and India. And taste. Uh, I just did Germany. Bitter beer, delicious sausages, strong coffee. If you like Thai food, you could talk about the taste of Thai food. But again, we don't have time to talk about everything. I'm just throwing enough stuff in there for us today. And it's okay to plan for more stuff than you actually need. Um, like I said, the biggest problem for part two is people don't have enough to talk about. Make sure you have plenty to talk about. Okay, and we can't put everything in our notes. We only have 1 minute to prepare. So let's assume that we are out of time for our notes. All else that we'll have to think of, need to think of while we are doing it. We'll have to think of other things while answering the question. But we have a decent amount of notes to start with. Let's say this is what you managed to put in your notes, right? Out of everything we've talked about so far, okay. So we put in the notes, my friends, parents, fun, like travel, right? We can't write full sentences. We don't have enough time. So these are things to trigger other thoughts in our mind, right? My friends, which may be my friend Joe, right? That makes us think of him, right? It's fun. That's why I want to do it. Also, another why is I like to travel. Then we have 3 countries. You should know the 3 countries. You don't need to write them down, right? We have Thailand, Germany, and Canada. Culture, you're interested in Thai culture. Graduate university, save money. These are things you need to do before you go. You will go by plane, right? And I mentioned culture again, beaches, castle, Black Forest. You probably don't need to mention culture twice unless you're going to think of it twice. Another thing we want to say is Canada is very big compared to China, US, and India. I mean, they're all kind of big countries, but what we wanted to talk about was that Canada has a smaller population than those other bigger countries. Delicious Thai food. Then we go on to what we wanted to say about Germany. Beer is bitter and it has savory sausages. Right? You could maybe write a little more than this, but keep in mind you only have 1 minute, right? And you're going to be doing some thinking during that minute. It's not going to be just writing. So let's say this is all the time we had for notes, and then we had to start talking. Okay, like I said, you will not have a lot of time for a lot of notes. Other things you might have to think of as you're writing your notes or while you're answering the question, which is hard. That's why you should practice this. Let's go through some other stuff, right? What emotions can you think of? Because we spent a whole lesson on emotions. And what story can you think of? Okay, our story here is our friend Joe. Let's say he got us interested in traveling when we were younger. You get excited when you think of traveling. It's boring to stay in the same place all the time, and you are envious of Joe traveling. Now, not all questions lend themselves to having a little story to put in, but this is a really good question where you could throw a story in, so let's do it. Now, again, I don't know your personal experiences. I'm just making all this up as an example, as a way to answer this. Okay, then let's look at our most recent lesson. Before this is nine strategies that we have, right? The first one is taking notes. We've already talked about that. So, how can we repeat the question in a rhetorical way? What examples can we give? I.e., or in other words, what other things can we answer? So let's look at the question again. Describe a plan in my life that isn't related to work or study. We simply just think of other things that we might have mentioned, right? I plan on getting married. I plan on having a child or having children. And how can we contrast ourselves with others? So for this, we might want to come up with some more plans, right? Think of other plans that other people may have that you don't. Examples, I have a friend that is interested in learning photography. I have another friend that is very interested in buying a house, right? These are some other plans. How can we not generalize here? And how can we give both sides of an answer here? The question doesn't ask us to generalize, so we don't need to worry about that for this answer. If we wanted to give both sides of an answer here, we could talk about two things. But for this, we're not going to do it. That's more like questions that ask you to pick one side of an argument where we could give both. Here, we're talking about traveling, and we've already picked three places. So that's good enough for this question. How can we compare past and present here? How can we discuss most cases versus an exception here? Okay, we can simply say that when we were younger, we were mostly interested in visiting other places, right? Or maybe we can mention a place that we used to want to visit, but we were finally able to visit if we want to compare it to the past, right? When I was a child, I wanted to visit Shanghai, but I changed my mind. Or I have now already visited Shanghai, so I have other places I want to visit now. We won't worry about most cases versus an exception for this one. How can we discuss different degrees of things here? For degrees, we could say out of those three countries, which one we want to visit the most, or we can think of other places we want to visit, but maybe that's not as important to us as the three places, as Thailand, Canada, and Germany, right? So maybe you could say, there are other places I like to visit, such as Egypt, France, and Peru, but I really want to see Thailand, Germany, and Canada much more. All right. So I'm about to give you an answer. I suggest you pause the video and really think about how we could put all this information together to answer the question. And then maybe try to answer it and then look at mine. Okay, you've been asked to answer that question and you have done your notes. How can we answer that? Okay, so I'm going to give you an answer I came up with using everything we talked about. I'm just going to go through and read it and then we'll talk about it. I hope you tried this yourself and you're doing your own thing to answer it. But I'm just going to go through the answer I came up with based on all the notes we came up with, right? Or all the things we thought about, all the strategies. Okay, so we'll start, we'll do a lot of the strategies, but we're starting with repeating the question, right? Hmm, describe a plan in my life that is not related to work or study. I really enjoy traveling. Sure, I plan to get married and have two children at some point, but the plan I feel the strongest about is traveling around the world. And the three places that I really want to go are Thailand, Germany, and Canada. I have a friend that plans to get into photography and another friend that always talks about buying a house. But I have to say, my biggest plan is going to those three countries. Sure, there are other countries I would like to see, such as Egypt to see the pyramids, France to see the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and Peru to see Machu Picchu. But Thailand, Germany, and Canada are more important to me. I remember back in elementary school, I had a friend named Joe. Every summer, his parents would take him traveling, and I was always very envious of him. Every new school year, Joe would come back and tell me where he had gone over the summer break, and it really got me interested in traveling. At that age, I was mostly interested in seeing Shanghai and Beijing. My parents eventually took me to those places, and now I am more interested in traveling to foreign places. Thai culture has always interested me, so that is one of the reasons that Thailand is on my list of places to visit. In photographs I have seen, there are always beautiful beaches there. Also, after I graduate university, my parents promised to take me somewhere in Asia, so I will pick Thailand when the time comes. There was a German restaurant near my home when I was in high school. After eating there several times, I became interested in seeing Germany. I love German sausages, and lately I have become interested in German beer. Also, I love the way castles look, especially Renaissance age castles. I know Germany has a lot of them, so that is why I want to visit that country. I am learning English, and I am getting quite fluent at it. Other English-speaking countries would be fun to visit, but Canada is the one I would like to see the most. It is such a big country, and compared to other big countries like China, the US, and India, the population is very small. I really want to see a country that is so large, yet has such a small population. So, that's my plan, to visit Thailand, Germany, and Canada. Thailand will probably be first, as my parents promised to take me. But I will plan on taking vacation once a year when I start working, and visiting the other two countries as well. Of course, the more I learn, the more interested I become in traveling, so I'm sure that I will add many other countries to my list as time goes by. Okay, so that took about 2.5 to 3 minutes to read aloud, maybe around 2 minutes 40 seconds. We have more information than we needed for that answer. Also, we didn't get to everything we planned when thinking about it, and that's fine, right? I know I didn't mention the bitter beer in Germany, right? A couple other things. I also added Beijing, even though we only talked about Shanghai. That's fine. You might end up doing that. Um, if you go too long, the interviewer will stop you. It's better to be stopped than not have enough to say, right? If you keep going, the interviewer will stop you and go, that's okay, but that's fine. You're being fluent. You knew you had to talk for 2 minutes and you talked for 2 minutes, maybe longer. Again, it's better to be stopped than to only talk for maybe 30 seconds or a minute and not have enough to say, in which case the interviewer might ask you to ask you a little bit more, but it's lowering your score because you're not talking enough. Okay, so your homework for this lesson. Find some part two questions online and practice answering them. It's okay to spend a lot of time thinking at first, right? Just make sure you could talk for a good solid 2 to 3 minutes. But by the time you take the exam, try to get your preparation down to only a minute, because really that's all the time you're going to have when you actually answer the question, when you actually take the test. So, when you first start, yeah, spend 5 minutes preparing if you need to, but lower that time. Lower it down to where where you prepare for 1 minute, and then you're able to talk for at least 2 minutes. And remember, part two is the hardest part for most students, so you should spend the most time preparing for it. Unless, I don't know, you're one of those people who seems to do well in part two, but has problems with part one or part three for some reason. But that's why we spent the longest amount of time on part two. Really, we're going to cover part one in one lesson and part three in another lesson, because those are much simpler, easier to answer. So part two is the hardest, so you should spend the most time preparing part two. Okay, for the next lesson, we're going to be looking at part one of the speaking section. We did part two because you may want to grab strategies for part from that we discussed for part 2 to do part 1 and part 3. Excuse me. So next time will be part 1. Okay, thank you guys. I'll see you on the next one. Good luck and practice, practice, practice. Really prepare. Find some part 2 questions. All right.